James C. It's the James C. Murphy remix of Love Is Lost, which is fantastic. Okay, my first special guest is Tim Marshall, who is not speaking here in his capacity as boss of us all, but is speaking here as I know him, which is as a Bowie fan. And Tim, over to you.
I'm sure you told me I was coming before you, in which case I would have been way less intimidated. About the only thing I can do better than Simon is an Australian accent. So, so I'm surprised he didn't say Lazar, actually, instead of Larry. But anyway, yeah, so normally I get to open these events, as Simon said, as a provost, and so I say some perfunctory words of congratulations and welcome and then disappear. And so it kind of feels very indulgent to actually be here in a different role, which is when I asked Simon, do you want me here as provost or as just a fan? He went, definitely as a fan. So it's very cool. Thank you. And thank you to Pam and everyone else who's organized this fantastic event. So, you know, when I was thinking about this, well, first of all, I should say, yes, Simon, I think, first took me seriously as a provost when he realized I was a Bowie fan. We were comparing our iPhones and trying to figure out who had more Bowie tracks on them. But I had, for a long time, thought that the new school should give David Bowie an honorary doctorate, but I couldn't quite bring myself to advance this idea because it seemed so indulgent on my part. I was a fan and I was a provost and I shouldn't use my position to go after somebody I was like so enamored with. So when Simon actually came up and said, I think he should get an honorary doctorate, it's like, cool, now I can get behind his idea. So it was great. So we tried for a couple of years, actually, and we got through to him, and he sent a message back, which was very warm, and for anything I'd love to, I'm not around on that date, please consider me for the next time round. And we reached out again the next year, and we got a much more vague response about, well, yeah, and now we know why, because that was only a couple of months ago. So so that was sad that we didn't manage to achieve that, but maybe somehow posthumously we can give him an honorary doctorate here, because certainly I think in terms of the new school and all the aspects, we're huge in performing arts and design and in music and social research and literature and poetry and all of that, and have that very avant-garde history of people like Cage, people interested in game playing and using the creative process in very particular ways. I think he would have been a perfect honorary doctorate. So that was a shame. But when I read Simon's book, I realized, you know, and he said it a lot, that there's a kind of type of Bowie fan. I found myself falling into a type of a Bowie fan, very much, somewhat similar. But in my case, I grew up in a fairly extreme suburbia because there was no urban. It was just suburbia. But the difference was I had no TV, so I had no idea what was going on. My parents were very Puritan, so we weren't allowed to watch anything. So, but we had some music, and my 3 elder sisters basically dominated the music scene, and my mother and my father. So basically I grew up with a whole amalgam of Joan Baez or Jimi Hendrix, or, you know, I think there was Desperado by the Eagles, and Elton John's Tumbleweed Connection and the Bee Gees, and, you know, my mother's South Pacific and My Fair Lady, and my father's Rachmaninoff and Beethoven. You get the picture. So wedged in there was Ziggy Stardust. And I thought, yeah, I liked all the music. I really thought it was fantastic. The only time I got a little nervous is when all my 3 sisters and mother used to go really enthusiastically into, I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair. So that unnerved me when I was 11. But, but aside from that, I was into all that music, and Ziggy Stardust was another one, and I was into it, but, you know, I was 11, I was 12, whatever. I wasn't really paying that much attention. But I got completely obsessed with the cover. Like completely, much more than the music. I was really obsessed with the cover art of Ziggy Stardust, and I kept staring at it and wondering, who is this person? I never saw the top of the pop thing. And on the back side, of course, is in the phone box in that bizarre quilted suit, looks like made out of upholstery. And I was like, who is this person? So anyway, so then fast forward, and I was living in Birmingham by myself with my parents, and in Birmingham, England, on the outskirts of Birmingham, in a row house. And my sisters were in Australia, and I was just there with my mother. My father was gone. Listening to the radio, no TV again. And at that time, end of 75, 76, Bohemian Rhapsody was in the top of the charts for like ever. And it was on high rotation, and Bohemian Rhapsody, which is 8 minutes long, was just over and over. And I swear, until about 5 years ago, I could have hummed every single bar of Bohemian Rhapsody, even though I never bought it. But wedged in between those was Golden Years came out. And I thought, well, that is cool. That is really cool. I hadn't been paying much attention. And so I got a ticket to Wembley Pool to go and see the Thin White Duke. Turned up got the train down to London, turned up to Wembley Pool, and was sitting there as a 14-year-old kid watching this, and it had that long, slow, droning introduction to Station Station. Actually, if anyone saw that concert, incredible introduction with that feedback single note that just felt so much pressure. And the room just built and built, because he wasn't on stage. And it just built, and it built, and it built, and it built, and after 4.5 minutes, you just saw a little piece of orange hair go around the back of the speakers, and the place just went nuts. And literally, there were people just like collapsing and going crazy. I'd never seen anything like this in my life. And I thought, holy hell, this is really something. It's like, I didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified or what. And clearly he was playing with that whole persona of total control, and it was really working. So then that was the very first album I bought, was Station to Station. So I went down, but I didn't have a turntable, so there wasn't much point. But anyway, I carried it back to Australia with me, and finally got to play it about 9 months later or 10 months later, by which time Low had come out. And I was so excited, I grabbed it. And because I wasn't a huge fan of it up until that point, I just thought Low was magnificent. I never felt, I know a lot of people are like, what is he doing? I feel betrayed. It's like, what's this weird music? I just thought it was absolute genius, and I loved it from the first minute I played it. I was totally excited. And from then on, I was really just a total fan, and started going backwards and forwards going back into his past catalogue, getting obsessed with the man who sold the world at various moments and other albums. And in typical fashion, felt a little bit, not a little bit, hugely disappointed by the 80s. Although I loved Let's Dance, I thought it was one of the best dance tracks of that period. And Absolute Beginners, I actually have a secret love of, particularly the album version with a fantastic Gil Evans arrangement at the back of it, this whole percussive piece at the back. But basically, I was an Iggy Pop fan as well, so what he did to China Girl and what he did tonight just felt to me like awful. How could he do that? Of course, they both cried all the way to the bank, but it was, and he took out that introduction to Tonight, which completely destroys it. And so there was a whole period where I did feel betrayed, not by the really great work of the 70s, but by that later period. But I came to appreciate it more later. And then seeing, Buddha of Suburbia, and then, Black Tie, White Noise, started to show glimmers of really interesting work coming up, and then Earthling and Outside I was really totally besotted with, and then sort of came back in. And then, of course, these last two albums, which I think, after such a long period, just remarkable. And I think actually, and Simon said it much better than I can, but the way he aged, and not just the death, but the way he just owned his own aging in a way rock stars would never do. And of course, if he was here, he'd say it's because I'm not a rock star. But he just really did age in the most extraordinarily honest way. And I think at the end of the day, because I tried, first of all, to be a tenor saxophone player, go figure, and then that didn't really work out. So then I went to art school. And I think as I spent a life in art and photography and sculpture and what have you, what I really learned from Bowie was the creative process, because there was something extraordinarily generous about the way he actually let you see what he was doing. Both directly when he talked about it, he was very honest. Despite having all these characters, he was super honest about his process. He was super honest about borrowing and stealing and appropriating different things and collaging them back together, and his influences. So to get an understanding of that, it wasn't about originality in some banal sense that I think a lot of us in art schools inherited in the 20th century, but it was really about this much more complex way of getting right in and moving around in this creative world and creating your own voice out of this assemblage. And I found that really incredibly intriguing, and I learned a tremendous amount from that. And it reminded me of, I think a lot of his characters were as much about getting him out of pushing him beyond his aesthetic comfort zone. So he could have ended up just writing novelty songs like The Laughing Gnome all his life. He could have just been doing that for other people. And it was clear that he kind of had to create these characters to actually play an aesthetic game to get himself out of his comfort zone and actually try and be somewhere in another aesthetic space, and not just for the theatrics of it, but I actually think for the creativity and the actual music of it, to get inside that. If you watch him doing Young Americans on the documentary 5 Years, you really get an insight into how he goes right into that music. But he's not pretending to be black. He's like, he can't be. He's actually super analytical. He's super technical. And Carlos Alamar's kind of great on there. He said, he came into the studio and said, he was the whitest dude I've ever seen in my life. He's like, it wasn't pink white, he was like translucent white. You could see right through him. So who is this guy? And then when they did a poll, there was a magazine in Philadelphia that did a big poll of what were the top albums in in the history of Philadelphia sound. And I don't know if anyone saw it. They sent it out to a ton of people, 300 music writers, musicians, younger, older, all over the city. And he came in around, I think Young Americans came in like 7 or 8, if I remember rightly, or maybe 12 or somewhere in there, out of 150. But the one thing they said is that it was the most consistently rated high across every single demographic of Philadelphia. Rich and poor, white and black, music, professionals, musicians, young and old. So, and I think there's something about the way he did it where, again, it was total appropriation in one sense, but it was super honest about the way he went about it. And it was remarkable. And I think that does show through in the way he aged and the way he did his last albums, as Simon just said, because at the end, when you listen to Black Star, which I think is an amazing album, and not just because he happened to die, I think it was an amazing album. It's just flat out amazing album. It's one of my favorite albums since probably Scary Monsters, as just a consistently brilliant piece of music. But you can see what he's doing there is he's starting to use his self as the thing he's appropriating and collaging and pastiching in different ways. There's all sorts of the harmonica, but there's references left, right, and center to the ambient sounds within The Man Who Fell to Earth and all sorts of different pieces he's picking up and channeling through his music, which is remarkable. And I just think I'm super glad we put this on. I'm delighted you all turned up. He did an amazing thing for my life. I can't even really fully express how much David Bowie meant to me in different stages in my life. And I'm just happy we're all here celebrating his life and his music and everything else about him. And thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So before the next guest, this is because Bowie's acting. Well, this is his best role. This is his best moment.